Okay, we are back. Sunday morning daf, Mem Amud Beis. I'm told 40b2, and we are the Amar Rava Hamilsa Amri. This is the, I think the second one of these in the middle of the page. Nope, not quite the middle of the page. Amar Rava Hamilsa, we're at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines down. Amar Rava Hamilsa Amri Amri. This is a statement that I made. The Itme Bar Marava, and they also said this in Eretz Yisrael. Mishmei de Rabbi Zera Kavasi. Rabbi Zera said the same thing, just like me. He shall beged. Let's say I have a talus, and the talus is made of a woven material, as we had learned, right? There was a machlokas, whether only garments that are made of wool or linen require tzitzis. And then, of course, just to recap, that we also said that linen has its challenges because if you put on, they didn't want us putting tchelas onto a linen garment, even though there were shatnas, whatever, because people would have kala ilan or whatever the reasons, the rationales we decided. So linen tzitzis, linen garments frowned upon. We don't love them as choice, right? Wool is great according to everybody, right? That's our beged of choice. But other materials as well, right? Other materials as well that are woven, according to some, they are required midrabanan, rabbinically, and according to others that are required midoraisa. And so, this opinion that says that we said, let's say I've got a garment that is a beged, that it has a woven material, but the corners, they reinforce the corners with some leather. So chayeves, even though leather is not a woven material, it's not considered a beged. It's going to be chayev because the main thing is the garment, right? Just the reinforced material on the edge doesn't make it a non-leather garment. He shall but if you've got the other way, if you've got a garment made out of leather, knafel shall beged, and then you've got reinforced corners that are woven, p'tura, then that will be exempt from tzitzis. My time, what's the reason? Ikar beged ba'inon, as we logically would deduce, you need the main garment to be woven, to be a woven fabric. Rav Achai ozo basar knaf. Rav Achai disagrees, and he says, nope, completely not true. Flip it around, go by the corner, right? Go by the corner. I suppose that in these sorts of circumstances, right, the halacha is that we go by the majority of the garment, but you don't usually see anybody reinforcing their corners with leather or materials because there is Rav Achai's opinion and why start up. Amar Rava, Amar Rav Schora, Amar Rav Huna. Rava says the name of Rav Schora and the name of Rav Huna. Hitel lebalas shalosh. If I've got a talus that has 3 corners on it, and I put tzitzis on my garment that has 3, the hishlima le'arba, and then I add the 4th, I finish off the 4th corner. I guess you were weaving and you hadn't gotten finished the 4th corner. I don't know how that would work, but let's say it's rounded, you square it off or whatever it is, and now you've got your 4th corner. Psula, now, since you put tzitzis on the garment, when the garment wasn't required to have tzitzis, i.e. when it only had 3 corners, those 3 tzitzis are not functional. And then when you put the 4th corner, they become functional. That is a problem. That's our old problem.
If you put that on, would you get an avera?
You would get an avera because your tzitzis would be puzzle, and then you're putting on a garment of 4 corners that has puzzle tzitzis on it. So that would be indeed a big problem, right? So therefore, that's a tasav moment also problem. Meisvei, we asked the following question though: Chasidim harishonim, the early Chasidim, not followers of the Baal Shem Tov, right? He was not around yet. These people had extra stringencies upon themselves. Kevan she'argu ba shalosh. Once they had woven a garment 3 finger breadths by 3 finger breadths. Right, this dimension. Why 3 fingers by 3 fingers? Because that's the minimum size that we consider to be a woven material for many halachos, like tuma. Right, when it comes in purity, we need to have a garment of minimal size. So once I've got it woven 3 by 3, so hayu mitilin batchelas. As soon as they got to that size, they put tzitzis on it. So a little mini dollhouse tzitzis. So that's a problem because we're going to learn that's way smaller than the minimum size of a tzitzis. As we are going to see.
It wouldn't even fit on a baby.
So you would not fit on a baby. I don't have babies that are 3 fingers by 3 fingers.
I think we saw that measurement previously. It says for a patch.
For patch, right? For a patch of garment, that's correct. That's the minimum size. It helps you as far as carrying on Shabbos. When we're talking about carrying something significant, a piece of material that's significant on Shabbos. Also for Tuma, we have it is a significant shear, but not as far as it's not a significant shear as far as tzitzis goes. So ema kevan chepatzu bashalosh haymatilin with chelas. So the issue is how can you put tzitzis on it? Because once you put tzitzis, you have tasev v'lo mina asui. So therefore, if it's a tasev v'lo mina asui problem, then the tzitzis are never valid even when you finish the garment. So the answer is no. What they did is once they got within 3 finger breadths of finishing the garment, they knew they were making this very large talus, and they said, we're getting close to the end. They were so excited, they said, let's put the tzitzis on it. So they put the tzitzis on it after it was already of sufficient size, probably before they finished the hem or the edge or whatever it is. But that's okay. Tasev v'lo mina asui. Do we really have an issue of tasev v'lo mina? We've taken for granted up to this point. We've mentioned it many times that we have an issue of tasev that you have to make your tzitzis. Although it does say this is the I'm told haven't seen it inside, but understand that the Netziv has a big piece about mitzvos that are say in the Torah. The mitzvah is not to make them, but the Torah tells us about making them, which creates sort of an elevated sort of a situation when you're making an item. So, for example, by tzitzis, it says, Vasu lahem tzitzis. You're supposed, now, is the mitzvah to make tzitzis? We're going to see later on, the question's going to come up, do we make a bracha when we're making tzitzis? If it's a mitzvah to make tzitzis, so maybe you should make a bracha when you make the pasuk says, make tzitzis.
No, the only bracha, how would you do the shemitz of tzitzis?
Well, that's what we do, but the question would come up if the mitzvah is making tzitzis. So now, is tasev v'lo mina asui really a challenge by tzitzis? V'hamar Rabbi Zera, didn't Rabbi Zera say, hitil lamuteles kshera? Here's the case. I've got tzitzis, and my tzitzis are wearing out, but they're still kosher. So I want to put new tzitzis on. But I don't want to ever have a moment. I want to be very machmir. I don't want to have a moment with this garment without tzitzis. So instead of taking my old tzitzis off and putting new ones on, I just tie new ones on it. And then afterwards, I'll cut the old ones off. So he says, if I do that, if I put tzitzis on my garment, my new garment, so then and I cut the old ones off, it's kshera, it's kosher. Now, why should that be? Because if you think about it, right, when you put the new tzitzis on, it wasn't obligated to put new tzitzis on. So therefore, when you cut the old ones off, you have tasev v'lo mina asui. So this would indicate there's no tasev v'lo mina asui problem. So Amar Rava says, hashta b'bal tosif kai. You know what the reason why is? Because there's a prohibition in the Torah that you're not allowed to add on to mitzvahs. Right. You can't do more than 4 tzitzis on a garment. So you start putting 8 on a garment, what are you doing? You're doing an aveira. Since you're doing an aveira, the act of making tzitzis is not taking effect. There's no act of making tzitzis. So therefore, these additional tzitzis that you're putting on are not extra tzitzis. They're nothings. Then you cut off the old ones, you're making them into some things. So therefore, it isn't an issue of tasev v'lo min ha asui.
So we would just treat it like an adornment or something.
Yeah, it's worse because it's an avera actually. You're doing the avera, but it can't be considered tzitzis when you're doing an avera with them.
So is
right?
it improper to do this? It sounds like.
Well, it sounds like it's it sounds like it's improper because the tasev v'lo min also isn't a problem. The tzitzis are kosher, that's not a problem, but it's an avera of Bal Tosif, right? That's what it sounds like. Okay. Maskifler Rav Papa. Rav Papa says, but here's the problem. Mimai de gavra la sufe kamichavin. Why do you assume that the guy is intending to add extra tzitzis on? I understand. How does Bal Tosif work? I have a mitzvah for put tzitzis on, and I put extra ones on. Well, that's no good, right? That's no good. You can't put extras on. That's a tasev v'lo mina asui. Then that would be a Bal Tosif if I intend it. But what if I don't intend it? My intention had nothing to do with putting extras on. This was intending to be future replacements. So therefore, he had no intention. What he's doing is he's nullifying the first ones. So Bal Tosif leka, maisa ika. So therefore, there's no Bal Tosif, which means that the tzitzis are, in fact, an action, right? Which means that they are ineffective when you cut the original ones off. It's a tasev v'lo mina asui problem. So Amar Rabbi Zera, Amar Rav Masna, Amar Shmuel, Tchelas ein ba mishum kil ayim va'afilu betalis petura. So the Gemara, was that an answer? Rav Zera, he says it's kosher. Oh, sorry. So he says, Rav Papa is explaining there's no tasev v'lo mina asui problem. That proves there's no tasev v'lo mina asui because it's not about tosif. It's perfectly fine. We say it's kosher, so he holds. Reb Zera does not hold of tasev v'lo mina asui. So it's at least a machlokas. Okay, so next, Amar Reb Zera, Amar Rav Mes is the next thing. The next thing about putting tzitzis onto a garment that already exists, that has tzitzis already on it. Tchelas ein ba mishum kilayim. If I'm putting tchelas on a woolen garment, there's no, on a linen garment, I'm putting tchelas, which is wool, on a linen garment, there's no problem of shatnez, as we have described, because the psukim in Devarim that tell us that those are, those are exclusive, right? Something is shatnez, but you can put tzitzis on. Va'afilu b'talis p'tura. And even with a talis, it's exempt. Now we're going to try to figure out what that means. My talis p'tura. What does that mean with a talis? It's exempt. Ilema deles beishiura. If the Bryce is explaining that you're talking about a talis that doesn't have the right amount, v'hatanya. So that we are going to say talis shakotin miskasabo rosho verubo v'agodol yotze ba derech arai chayeves betzitzis. The size. What's the minimum size for a garment that you can wear betzitzis on? It needs, and there is a minimum size. The minimum size is a talis that a child-sized talis. Now the Rishonim discuss what is a child. Who's a child, right? There's lots of different children, different sizes, right? Some say it's the size of a child that gets to the age of chinuch. Some say it's a child that gets to the age where he doesn't walk around unclothed, and so therefore the clothes are of value, of significance to him. But clearly, we're not talking about a 13-year-old child, a 12-year-old child who's basically adult size. We're talking about a more size.
Like 6 or 7 years old or whatever.
Yeah, something like that, right? Depending on which of the Rishonim we're discussing. And for an adult, it's a question whether this is an additional qualification or whether this is just a clarification of that size, that an adult would wear it temporarily, meaning I got to go out and get the newspaper. I don't have newspapers. It used to be in the old days, right? You'd get a newspaper delivered to your front door.
Someone running a bike and throwing it.
That's right. And if you didn't have a dog, you would have to go outside yourself and pick up the newspaper. Well,
you get wet from the sprinklers. Whatever.
You're in your pajamas and you're drinking your cup of coffee. You don't want to get dressed in order to go get the newspaper. You want to read the newspaper in your slippers. So you just throw something on in order to go outside. So if that's the sort of a garment that you might throw on so that, if your neighbor waves and says hello, you wave back, right? That's okay.
They would be going on getting your newspaper wet.
Okay, so that's the size. Okay, so Eina kotin miskasa barosh v'rubo. But if this talis is not of the right size for a child to be able to, most of his body and his head to be covered, afal pisha godol yotze ba'arai, even if the adult might put that on, it is exempt. Okay, so that's what this brisa is talking about. This brisa that had said, right, that even a talis that's exempt, meaning that seems to be a talis that's exempt from tzitzis, right? There's not an issue of shatnez by it. So then the brisa continues, v'chein le'inyan kilayim. This is also the case as far as shatnez goes. So we asked the question about this brisa. My v'chein le'inyan kilayim. What do we mean also similarly as far as the issue of kilayim, of shatnez? Ilema v'chein le'inyan isur de kilayim. Are we saying that there is also similar, that just as far as tzitzis, right? That just as a garment doesn't require tzitzis until it's sizable enough to be able to cover a child or an adult temporarily, so too, there's no problem of kilayim of shatnez unless the garment is large enough to be able to be a cover for a person temporarily, right? So if you have a small little garment, it's not an issue. V'han and not. We learned in a Mishnah, clearly that's not the case. It says in kilayim. Ein arai bekilayim. There is no temporary by kilayim, right? So a person, we know that in practice, went to a workshop on shatnez, and the guy was showing us scary things. He showed us a baseball mitt that had a lining on the inside that was shatnez, right? Even small little patches. Shatnez is a problem. It doesn't matter. There's no minimum size like that for shatnez. Rav Nachman and Rabbi Yitzchak, and Rav Nachman says in Rabbi Yitzchak, that which the brisa says v'chein le'inyan kilayim, he says v'chein le'inyan sodin batzitzis. This is the rule about shatnez as far as tzitzis is concerned, meaning that if the garment is large enough to require tzitzis, then there's no prohibition about putting shatnez on the tzitzis, right? If you've got a little garment that has no obligation of tzitzis, so then you put wool on it, so now you've got shatnez. That's a problem, right? It's got to be large enough that your tzitzis is going to be a factor, right? So now that means it comes out from the brisa that if I've got a garment that is exempt from tzitzis, I'm not allowed to put wool. It's a linen garment. I can't put wool on it because that'll create shatnez. Okay, so that's what we say. Now, Elamai Petura. So then that means when we say in the Brisa had made us a confusing statement. The Brisa had said, right? Even in a garment that's exempt. Well, that we know is not the case. If the garment, the Brisa continued on and said that if the garment is too small, then it doesn't require tzitzis. You can't put it on. So what does that mean? That it's potter for kilayim. So elamai petura. What are we talking about? A garment that. What are we talking about? Tzitzis that's petura, meaning hitil lamutelis. This is our case. You've got a garment. It's certainly large enough, but the garment already has tzitzis on it. That's a talus that's potter. So since the talus is potter, so if you put, it's what it's telling us, even though the talus is potter right now, it has no obligation of tzitzis. If I tie new tzitzis on, so then there's no prohibition of kilayim. There's no prohibition of shatnez on it. So that means,
It sounds a lot like what we were just saying.
that's the point, right? So therefore, the Torah is saying that as far as tzitzis is concerned, you can put them on even, and there's no prohibition of tasa v'lo min ha'asui issue. In other words, the tzitzis are irrelevant at some point. So therefore, you should say that since these tzitzis are irrelevant, why is it okay to put them on? It should be a shatnez problem. So that sounds like very similar to what we said, right? So. But we said either one way or the other, right? We said that it was kosher, right? That the tzitzis are kosher. Why are the tzitzis kosher? Either because you had in mind that they were not going to be valid as baltosif, and therefore you were tying them as tzitzis initially, and there's no problem of tasav v'lumin asoi. Or even though you weren't tying them as tzitzis initially, since they are in the end usable for tzitzis, the garment becomes kosher once you cut the initial tzitzis off. So the ha'amra Rabbi Zera chadazimna. So then, like you said, why isn't the same? We already had Rabbi Zera say something very similar before. He already sort of indicated that the tzitzis are kosher after the fact. Why do we need to then also say the tzitzis are kosher after the fact? Therefore, there's no shatnez problem. So the answer is chada mikal dechaverta itmar. One was said, and the other one was derived from the first. Right? That's how Rashi says one was derived from the first. Tosfos points out it really should be that the second one was said first and they derived the other one. Because just because you're saying that the tzitzis are kosher doesn't necessarily mean that you can do this and it's not a shatnez problem. But once you tell me it's not a shatnez problem, because the tzitzis are for sure kosher now, because that's why it's not a shatnez problem, then we can deduce from that the other statement that Rabbi Zera made, which is that the tzitzis are kosher after I cut the other tzitzis off. So in any event, it's a similar statement. Tosfos says something very kind of nice. It's worth mentioning since it's a topic that we know. Tosfos says, is it Tosfos, right? Yeah, he has this Tosfos, Babal Tosef Koi Maisa Lohavi. He says, when I cut the when I make the logic behind Reb Zera saying it's tasav v'lo is a problem is that since I made the extra tzitzis through an avera, by cutting off the first tzitzis, those tzitzis now become valid. And there's an action in cutting the first tzitzis off that makes it not tasav v'lo, right? The action is cutting the first tzitzis off, which now makes the second tzitzis valid. Says Tosfos.
You mean the
he has two, the old pair, the old set, right? Exactly. But Tosfos says we have a discussion in Maseches Sukkah. What if I put schach onto my sukkah and it's still attached to the tree? Right? It's not kosher. What if I cut it after it's already placed on my sukkah? Says so the answer is no, it's not kosher because tasav v'lo min asui. You got to pick it up and you move it around. You can't just leave it lying there.
Is it on during the holiday or after the holiday?
Doesn't matter. Before Yontif, I can't.
If you cut it and you move it around before,
then you're fine. But if you don't move it around, it's tasav v'lo min asui. Says Tosfos. Why is cutting there not an action, but here cutting is an action? Tosfos says it's different and sarachiyun. It's different, but sarachiyun, right? Okay, so that's a great question, right? But he doesn't really answer it other than to say it's different. We can sort of see that there is a difference, right? Cutting the branch itself is different than cutting the other bear, which permits this one. right? But it's a great question. Okay, continuing on. Tana Rabbanan. Our rabbis learned talis kafula. I take a very large garment, I fold it in half. The way that I'm going to wear it is folded. Okay, so now it's folded in half. Chayeves batzitzis. So then you have to put the tzitzis. Where do you put your tzitzis? You put 2 tzitzis by the corners that are, the regular corners, and then at the fold you put the tzitzis where you folded it. Okay, so the 4 corners, because that's how you're functionally wearing it.
Right. Fold becomes a corner.
The fold becomes a corner. Right. Correct. The fold becomes a corner.
They could have fooled me.
Rabbi Shimon says no. You don't put it into the fold, right? That was a pun. I just got it, right? Could have fooled me. Okay. Fine. Rabbi Shimon says no, right? You don't put the tzitzis in the middle, right? That's not the place to put your tzitzis. You put tzitzis in the middle of the garment, even though that's where the fold is. Vishavin, they agree though, that if you folded it over and you sewed it up, making a double ply, then yes, then you would put it in where that corner is. Tfara pshita. Obviously, if you've sewn it up, then you've now just got a 2-ply garment. Of course, that's where you would put the tzitzis. Lo tricha denukta besichi. A couple of explanations what denukta besichi is. That you put it, either you sewed one end, but you didn't sew it all the way around. You sewed it with big stitches. Some other, whatever kind of way that you stitched, didn't seem to be a very permanent, complete type of stitching. So, nevertheless, that's where the machlokes is. That's where the argument is. Rabba Bar Huna, Ikel Lebei Rava Bar Rav Nachman. We've got these stories, right? So Rabba Bar Huna comes to the house of Rava Bar Rav Nachman. Chazye Dahava Mikase Talis Kefula. He was wearing one of these double garments, right? The Rami Lechute Ilave Kfela, and I guess it became undone, and he had the tzitzis by his head. Right? In other words, because the talis, right, originally is supposed to be worn doubled over, but because it had become undone, so now half of it is body length in front, half of it was body length in back. The fold is now up here, and he's got his tzitzis up by his ears. Right? Right? So he pointed it out to him. So if Shita, he took his talis off, the asachuta v'kam lahade reshe, and the tzitzis that he took from it were by Rava's head, right? That's where they were. So Amar Lei, Lav Hainu Kanaf Dichsiv Rachmana Boraisa. So Rabba says to Rava, right? You don't put the tzitzis in the middle of the garment, right? That doesn't make sense. He says that's not what the Torah says. That you put it on the corners, right? So therefore, that fold is not where you're supposed to put it. Also Shadye Ikse Glimach Risi. So Rava heard that, he took the garment off, and he put on another one, right? Put on another garment so that he wouldn't be in violation. Amar le mi savret chovas gavrahu. He says, how does that help? Yeah. So that helps you. You're not wearing the talis that's not kosher, but chovas talisu. I hold that the obligation is on the garment. Meaning the garment, you can't have a 4-corner. The Torah says, if you have a 4-corner garment, you put tzitzis on it. We presume that always, because that's what we hold, we presume that it's on us, right? If I have a 4-corner garment sitting in my drawer, so then it doesn't need tzitzis. If I'm putting on a 4-corner garment, then I put tzitzis on it. Says Rabbi, not so. The requirement is that the talis has tzitzis on its 4 corners. So fine, you've taken off that talis, means that you're fine, but that garment still doesn't have tzitzis on it properly.
Anything you wear 4 garment, you for sure need to wear tzitzis. Why?
Correct, but you may also need to have put 4 tzitzis on every 4-cornered garment that you own.
Right, so can you have a poncho sitting in your drawer without...
Exactly, right. If you've got something, if I go to the store, you can buy tzitzis and want to make them yourself, and I go, great, this is a great Sunday project, and I pick it up on Wednesday and put it in my drawer until Sunday. Is that a problem?
No, because
right. So that's what Rabba says. So he says, telling him, Rabba says to Rava, can't just take your talis off. You've got to fix it. So lema misayele. So let's say this supports what he's saying, because the Hasidim Rishonim. Remember that story of the Hasidim Rishonim? Kivan she'argu bashalosh. Once they got to the point where their talis, before they even finished the talis, they got to the point where they were nearing the end. They would put the tzitzis on it right away because they didn't want to have a moment where the garment didn't have tzitzis on it. So therefore you see that that's indeed the problem. You don't want to have this garment without tzitzis even for a moment. So the answer is don't bring a proof from them because Shani Chasidim, you know the Chasidim, they're different. They are strict, right? So they threw extra stringency and that wasn't required. Upliga de malacha. This is interesting, right? This is actually a argument against the angels of Shemayim. I'm not sure I can recall another time in Shas where the angels are quoted. De malacha ashkechei l'Rav Katina. Because we generally have a principle, lo b'shamayim hi, right? The Torah is not in heaven, so who cares what the malachim hold? But it's interesting, right? An angel found Rav Katina. De michsi sadina. He was wearing a talus, okay? And he was wearing this talus, and it was made out of linen, and he didn't put tzitzis on it, right? Because we said that you're not going to put. He doesn't want to put his tchelas, right? He didn't want to put the tzitzis on the linen garment, as we said. Now, we said that on Daf Mem Amud Beis. The way this sounds, if we hadn't realized it before, and I'm not sure that I had till I read this Gemara, that what they were actually saying is, not only are you, well, it's machlokas rishonim, right? Not only you're not supposed to put tchelas on, right? Because that's blue, that has to be wool. You can still put linen on. Could be you don't even put any tzitzis on. What the chachamim were saying, it's a taseh, it's a sheva al taseh. Chachamim have the right to tell you, don't do a positive commandment. Don't wear this. It's actually as you just said, is it an avera? It's not an avera. It's a bittul aseh, a violation of a positive commandment. Positive commandment is when you wear a garment with four corners, put tzitzis on it. He's wearing a garment with four corners and he's not wearing tzitzis on it. Why? Because the Rabban, it's not a problem, because the Rabbanan said don't do it. The Rabbanan sometimes tell us not to do a positive commandment when there's a problem. Like, for example, don't blow shofar on Rosh Hashanah that comes out on Shabbos, right? Because we might carry it, right? Don't take a lulav and esrog on Shabbos, right? Because, okay, so we have these circumstances and situations where because of the problems of carrying, the potential for carrying, don't do this positive commandment, even though the Torah says to do it.
Could be muktzah.
And so we said muktzah is not a problem because muktzah is only rabbinic, but carrying is a problem because that's a doraisa. So we don't want anybody wearing these wool items because we had discussed, right? Because potentially you'll wear it and it won't be the appropriate Kahal Yereim or whatever we had said back there, right? We didn't want the wool. We didn't want you wearing the wool on the linen. Potential of shatnez if you don't put it on right. So therefore they said any linen garment, don't put tzitzis on it. So he's walking around in the summertime. He's wearing his linen garment. He's got no tzitzis on it. The angel sees him. Amar le, the angel says to him, Katina, Katina. There's only angels talk to Rav Katina. So he says, Sadina bekaita, you wear linen in the summertime, Visar b'lo besitva, and in the wintertime, you wear a wool coat, and your wool coat has rounded corners on it, so you don't need to put tzitzis on that. Tzitzis matahela, you never wear tzitzis. So Malchus taking issue with Rav Katina, he's not wearing tzitzis. He's always got a reason to exempt himself. Amar le, and shisu aseh, he says, okay, so what's the problem? I'm not doing a mitzvah aseh. It's not a punishment. You don't, because Yehuda said, what's the punishment for that, right? So Yehuda, common question, right? No punishment for that. There's no punishment for that. You didn't do an aseh. So, okay, you missed an opportunity, but it's not an isser. So Amar le, so the angel says, you're right, but Bisman de'ikaritcha, when Hashem gets angry and he's going to punish the whole world, so who does he take it out on, right? You lose the protection of the positive commandment. So some people get the extra zechuyos and they have protection. You lose protection, right? Comes COVID, and we know who's in trouble. So your tzitzis, right? You had people. There you go. Kavod yantiv. That's exactly what I meant. Kavod yantiv, kavod Shabbos protects you. So that's what you have to have. Iyamar bishlamo. So if you say chovas gavrahu, so if you're going to tell me what was Rav Katina, what was the angel telling to Rav Katina? It's an obligation upon you. That's what the problem is. So Delo Karami, he says that's why he says okay, you're not supposed. That's why he says you're not putting it on. That's why we're angry at you because you should be why are you trying to figure? So Ella Iyamart Chovas Talasu. If the obligation is on the talus, Halo Mechayva, he doesn't have a talus, so there's no obligation. So what's the problem? What are you getting angry at Rav Katina for? He doesn't own it. It's not an issue, right? The point is that you, Rav Katina, should go find one. Then it's an issue on you. So Ella my chovas gavrahu. So we say it must be that's an obligation on a person. So nehi dechayva rachmana. What are you going to say? It's still part of the question. What are you going to tell me? It's an obligation on a person. Nehi dechayva rachmana ki mikase talis debas chiyuva. When does the Torah tell you to When does the obligation start? When you put on a talis that has 4 corners and you're obligated. If you don't, you're not obligated. Mi mikases talis de la baschiyuva mi chayeves rachmana. But if you're going to put on a garment that doesn't require it, how does the Torah obligate? The Torah doesn't obligate you in that circumstance. Ella, so this is what the angel was saying. Hachi kamarle, he was telling him, Tatzdike lemifter nafshach mitzitzis. He says, you seem to be trying to figure out some kind of tricky way to get out of tzitzis. Right? That's what you want to do. You want to figure out how to get around the issue. As though tzitzis is a problem, that's where I have a problem with you. It's not that you're obligated as a person, you've got to put on tzitzis, but the problem is, as a human being, the mentality of trying to get around having an obligation of tzitzis, that's where the problem is. So it sounds like it neither is according to Tosfos' version of this, right? He says Ella means that Rashi is telling you Rashi's version of this that it does seem to be going back and saying it's an obligation on the person, and Tosfos says it doesn't prove one way or the other way. But okay. Amar Rav Tuvi bar Kisna Amar Shmuel. Rav Tuvi bar Kisna said in Shmuel, Klei Kufsa. So if I've got the talis, and it's sitting in a box, sitting in my drawer. Chayav betzitzis. You got to put tzitzis on it. That's the obligation that we say that tzitzis.
It's a garment.
It's a garment. It's a garment-driven requirement. However, Shmuel would agree that if you've got an elderly person, and he's already buying his funeral he's preparing for his funeral, and he gets himself a talis for a funeral, shepturah. That you don't put tzitzis on. My time, what's the reason? Asher techase ba amar rachmana. The Torah says it's a garment that you're going to wear. V'hai lavli kusi avidi. He's not planning to wear this one. This is a funeral thing, and okay.
One of you wants, it says, I want you. He wants to work to this when he prepares this tzitzis.
So that's an issue, right? Because this we have a prohibition against wearing tzitzis in a cemetery, called loeg l'rosh, right? So if somebody is teasing the somebody who's silent, right? It's supposed to be somebody who can't speak. I tease them, whatever. But the idea is that the dead can't do mitzvos. So if you do a mitzvah in front of the dead, so you're a disgrace to Hashem. Right, so therefore we don't wear tzitzis in a grave. You tuck your tzitzis in when you come to a graveyard.
The dead want to wear tzitzis. You don't bury.
So therefore, the issue is the dead don't wear tzitzis. They would not put tzitzis on a garment. I believe that is not the case. Currently, I've never done a tahara, being a kohen and things, but as I was preparing for this, it seemed like, and I'll verify it because I don't know, everybody probably at home probably knows the answer to this already, but that we do in fact put tzitzis on because it would be embarrassment to the mace to specifically put a talis on after he dies that has no tzitzis on it. So therefore, it kind of reverses the loik l'rush sort of a thing. We'll look that up and see if that's true.
Wow.
Good child, though. Yeah.
I believe that we do put a talis. People buried a talis, but have tzitzis on it. Yeah.
Wow.
Bahishata vade raminon lei. So he says, at that point, right? For sure, we should put on tzitzis, right? As we say here, mishum loeg l'rosh cheref osehu. Somebody who is teasing the silent, right? He is doing a he's
the dead.
Yes, the silent of the dead, right? And he's going to be a disgrace to his creator. So for sure we put tzitzis on there, right? We don't want to, the reverse, right? So then it's whatever the reverse of the outcome of the Gemara is. So we don't put tzitzis on. I don't know. Let's double check and see people who do a tahara, whether they put tzitzis on or not. But he's saying,
I sure remember the Chevra.
so we're going to double check and double check and find out, right? Mm-hmm. But this, I remember it comes out like the way this Gemara seems to say is for sure you put it on because that would be a terrible embarrassment to the mace, but maybe not. So okay.
The note here points to Rashi.
Yeah, so Rashi says, right? If you don't put it on, it's making fun of the fact that he's dead and he has no more mitzvos, right? But I don't know. Nowadays, I think we don't put it on. So let's see exactly how it works out. But I remember seeing that the Gemara comes out the opposite of. Okay, so in any event, right? So we'll double check that.
Yeah.
Um,
Where is that?
Yeah, Tosfos in Meseches Nida Shalom Nagu Kain. Right? He says that our minhag is not like that. So, right, Ubatama Davar Shein Anu Noag in Kedivrei Gemara Mefureshas, even though it says, well, the Gemara specifically says we don't put tzitzis on, and then we do. Right, the Tosfos over there, Meseches Nida, has lots of explanations. So the Tosfos over there has four answers. He lists them here. 4 answers to why we don't listen to that. Okay, so the answer is we do put tzitzis on in burial, and Tosfos asks the question in Meseches Nida why the Gemara says no, and we do it. Amar Rachba, Amar of Yehuda. Rachba says in the name of Yehuda, Talis shenikraa chutz l'shalosh. If you've got talis and it tears outside of the corner, not by the corner, so then yitfor, you could just sew it up, and that's okay, right? Toch shalosh, but if the tear is within 3 the corner, lo yitfor, you can't tear it, you can't sew it up. The problem is that we're concerned that you'll have threads that are dangling, and then you'll tie those into the tzitzis, and then you'll have a problem, and then you'll, I guess, cut the thread after it's already sewn in, and then you'll have a tasav min asli problem, right? So therefore, we don't sew close to the corner where the tzitzis would go. Tanya Nami Hochi, we have a brisa that supports that as well. Talash nikra chutz l'shalosh yitfor. If you've got a tear in your garment, you can sew it up. Toch shalosh, but if it's within 3 of the corner, Meir Omer lo yitfor v'kamon yitfor. Remember, says you don't. The Chum say that you do. Okay, and so that's what's going on there. Shavin, they agree. Shelo yavi afilu ama al ama mimakom acher ubatchelas v'tolaba. But they agree. Rabbi Meir and Chacham agree. What you should not do: don't bring a patch from some other place where you've got tzitzis already tied on. You get a garment a foot by amma by an amma, and you've already got talis on, and just take that and stick it onto the corner. Now I fixed it, and I've got the tzitzis. That for sure is no good. That's for sure tasav and rasik, because it came with the tzitzis already fixed, and I put it on. That's for sure no good.
When you put the patch on, does that include the strings or not excluding the strings?
It would have the strings on, right? So shavin, they agree though, shemevi tchelas mimakom acher v'tolaba, that you can get tzitzis, untie it from one, and tie it onto another new talis, right? I can take tzitzis strings from this one and move it over to that one. That I can do. Obevad shelo tehei mufsekes, as long as the threads are full and complete. Okay, you can't. Right, we had said before, I can have the threads can start to break, and they don't even have to be the original size. But we had learned in the Shulchan Aruch that's when you are having an existing pair of tzitzis. But if you make a new pair of tzitzis, you need to have the strings long enough. So once you untie this and you retie it on another garment, that's like new. So therefore, that's why it's not tasavum and asay. So since it's like new, you need to have the length of the strings that are sufficient. Shmas mino. So we can learn from this brisa, matir mi beged lebeged. You can take tzitzis off of one garment and put it onto the other garment. Right? So no, maybe that's not true. Dilma di'i blai. Maybe what's going on here is the first one's worn out, right? Maybe the first garment wore out. I can't necessarily indicate that I'm allowed to take it from one garment and put it onto another. Maybe the first one has no mitzvah of tzitzis anymore. So
Right.
Tana Rabbanan. So Rabbi wants to the Gemara wants to prove that you can move it from one to the other. Talis shekula tchelas. If I've got a talis which is all entirely tchelas, all blue. This is the Korach question, right? So then, what color can I put on to the tzitzis, right? So we had learned that we do white because most of the wool is white, right? Plain wool, so therefore it's white, so therefore we do white in contrast to the tchelas, right? However, it sounded from there that the reason for white is because that's the color of the talis. If the color of the talis was red, you'd put red strings on together with your tchelas, right? So you match, right? Whatever the color of the talis is, that's the color of the strings you pick, right? Tosfos points out that is not how he learns the Gemara before. It was how Rashi learns it. It says the color didn't seem to be relevant. He was talking about the material, whether it was wool or the material, whatever it was. But we'll explain this Gemara according to Rashi. And he said that he holds that the minhag is to do white regardless. Now, if you look in the Mechaber and the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah, there's an argument. The Mechaber says you can put the color that matches the garment. And the Ramah says we do white regardless, and the minhag has been to put white regardless, and so therefore you sort of usually see white, right? Although that store that you saw, right, that's where he gets this from, right? No, he probably was a Sephardi fellow, right? Because I would imagine there aren't a lot of Ashkenazim shopping in his shop, I suppose, with the concern that they would do it white. Is it possible? Fair question. Probably not, right? I don't know, but the Ramah seems to say white is that because most of the garments are white, white is the minhag, and so we do white. Seems like white is the minhag is the answer, but okay. Anyway, now if it's all tchelas, so now what do I do, right? Because I don't want to put tchelas for my white strings because they're tchelas, right? So I already have tchelas on the tchelas strings. So his answer is that if the talis is tchelas, kol minei tzivon, you can put any color you want on it. And kol minei tzvunin potrin ba, right? I want to do some reanalysis of Korach's question based on this Gemara, right? Because Korach's question, we presume is, well, if the talis is all tchelas, why do you have to put tchelas on? Because it's taken care of, right? This question is sort of amplified here because you actually, seems like the Gemara is saying you shouldn't put tchelas on as your white strings. Why would you even need the blue string? Okay, fair question. Anyway, chutz mi kala ilon. The only color that you can't do is kala ilon. Kala ilon you can't do. Why? Because the kala ilon, right, you say, well, hey, that matches, right? But the problem is that now that I can't use kala ilon in tzitzis strings because once I untie it, people are going to presume it to be tchelas, and then this is the issue. It's a proof that you can move from one garment to the other garment. Because if it's tied in to this garment, it's not a problem. It only becomes a problem when I untie it, and now I've got all these blue strings, and somebody's going to take this string and then use it as tchelas in another garment. Comes from a plant. I think that we said translated in art school as indigo, right? Correct. Indigo, which is an Indian dye, and the First Nations used indigo as some kind of a dye, so they had that dye. So that seems to indicate that you can move it from one garment to the other. So meisvei, so we ask the following question. Talis ein poter ba ella mina. It says a talis, right? You can only use the same color, right? You can only use the same color, the strings, right? Besides the tchelas ones, you got tchelas strings, and then you need the same color for the other ones. Talis shekula tchelas, if you've got a talis which is entirely tchelas, maybe tchelas, bring tchelas and another color. Vitolaba, and that's what you hang on there. The kala ilon lo yavi, you should not bring kala ilon. Vim hevi, but if you do, kosher, then it's kosher. So therefore, that if you, it seems like the first one says that if you put the kala ilon, it's pasul. But in the brisa here it says that they're kosher. So now you've got a contradiction. Which is the tzitzis pasul because I put kala ilon on, or is it kosher? So Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak explains lo kasha. It's not a contradiction. Kan betalos bas arba'a chutin, kan betalos bas shmona chutin. We presume that all of our tzitzis are made by taking 4 strings, folding them over, and making them 8. But the reality is that we see from the Gemara, and Gemara is coming up, that actually you can have more strings in your tzitzis. Right? 8 is the minimum. Right, 8 is our minimum amount, and even though we said making 2 sets of tzitzis on a corner is baltosif, adding extra strings to the tzitzis is not. So if I've got a talis which is made of 4 strings, so then you can't. So if 2 of them are kala ilon, it's pasul because the Torah says you need to have 2 types. Right? You need to have 2 types. So therefore, I'm going to need 2 that are tchelas and 2 of a different color. Therefore, this is pasul. But the other brisa, I've got 8. So what do? I've got 2 strings that are tchelas, 2 that are a different color, and then I can add in extra kala ilon all I want. Right? I've got a solution. So maybe that's the answer. Shmas mina, so we can see from here. Now this is the point. Shmas mina, we see from this whole discussion that matir and mi beged lebeged, you're allowed to untie tzitzis from one to go to the other, right? Because otherwise, how is kala ilon a problem, right? How is kala ilon, right? If why would the chachamim be concerned that you're going to untie this kala ilon? You shouldn't do it because you'll tie it into another one. What would be the challenge? So what? You're not going to ever untie it. Once this is tied up, it's good. So the answer is no. Dilma di'i avad. The answer is, even though you're not supposed to tie from one garment to the other, somebody will. And so therefore, we don't want you using kala ilon, so we're going to avoid kala ilon at all costs. Don't put kali ilam strings in your tzitzis. Okay. Itmar, it has been said, Rav Amar ein matir mi beged lebeged. So Rav says you're not allowed to untie from one to another. Ushmuel matir mi beged lebeged. Shmuel says that you can. Rav Amar ein madlikin mi ner lener. Rav says also on Chanukah, one of 8 times in Shas Chanukah was mentioned, right? Ein madlikin mi ner lener. You can't light from one Hanukkah candle to the next Hanukkah candle. And Shmuel Amar madlikin mi ner lener. You can. Rav in there it tells us that the problem is that you can't light from a Ner Chanukah to another candle and then use that to light to the next one, because you're lighting from something that was used for Kedusha to something that's not Kodesh, and that's going to be degrading and removing the light. So he says that even going from candle to candle directly is also a problem, either that you might do that, or even that might indicate that it's taking away from one candle to the other. Shmuel said,
predates Haniras Halalu.
Well, this would not be an invalid use of them, right? Right? So this would not, that would be the argument, right? It's not an invalid use of them. Okay, so now, Rav says, in halacha Rabbi Shimon begreira, ushmuel Amar halacha Rabbi Shimon begreira. So there's a machlokas. Comes up many, many times, and we'll see it when we get to Masechah Shabbos and in other places. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon call a davar she'enu miskavin. When you get to Hilchos Shabbos, in Shabbos, in order to be chayiv for violating and doing a malacha, you need what's called a malacha she'tricha legufa. You need a malacha that's done for its own sake. Now, if I do a action, my intention is not to violate Shabbos, and only as a consequence of my action, I indirectly violate Shabbos. So then, what's the status of that? So, example, I have a very heavy bench, and I have a backyard. So I take this bench and I drag it through my backyard. So there's a machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon.
You're digging grass. You're digging.
That's correct. So I'm digging. Now it would have to be in a field that I would plant. Let's say backyard is good because they would plant grass there, so I do need to hoe it up in order to be able to help it grow things. So Rabbi Yehuda says that is prohibited. Usser. Why? Because even though my intention is only to move the couch from here to there, the fact that I'm digging a trench along my way, right, it can't be definite. If it's definite, that's a psik ratio, that's a whole different story. It has to be a sort of a circumstance where it occurs. It's likely it occurs. I violated the prohibition. Shimon says, no, that we call that a davar she'eino miskavin. It's an unintended consequence. Davar she'eino miskavin is only prohibited midrabanan, only rabbinically prohibited. So he says davar she'eino miskavin is permissible. It's not a violation of Shabbos. Rav says halacha is like Rabbi Shimon when it comes to Greira. And Shmuel says the halacha is, Rav says the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon in Greira. The halacha is not like Rabbi Shimon in Greira. And Shmuel says the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon in Greira. So that's all of these three different things that Rav and Shmuel argue about, put in together. So, Amar Abaye said, Kol mili demar ovid karav. My Rebbe, Rabbi Bar Nachmani, right, the Rabbi that we hear about all the time, Rabbi Bar Nachmani, that was Abaye's Rebbe. He says, my Rebbe always said the halacha is like Rav, except lebar mehani tlas, except in the cases of Isurim, right? Then except for these three cases. The Ovid Kishmul. In these three circumstances, he followed Shmuel's halacha. That's why we mentioned them. Matir mi beged lebeged. You're allowed to untie tzitzis from one garment and move them to another. Madlikin mi ner lener. You're allowed to light Hanukkah's candle from one to the next directly. V'halacha k'Rabbi Shimon begreira. And the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon in greira, that it's not aser mida oraisa. Detanya, we learn in a brayso, Rabbi Shimon Omer. Rabbi Shimon says, Gorer adam mita kisei v'safsal. A person is allowed to drag a couch, a chair, or I guess a bed, a couch, or a bed, a chair, or a couch, as long as it's not his intention to make the furrow. Okay? So, Rabbi Yehuda, Masar lo likatzra. Rabbi Yehuda wanted to give his talus over to somebody to wash it. Rabbi Chanina, Ovid le sisa. So, Rav Chanina, so Rav Yehuda wasn't concerned, right? He just handed it over there, right? Right, I guess he was not worried that the tchelas would rip the guy who was doing the wash might replace it with Kahal Yereim instead, right? Oops, I made a mistake. I got to fix it, and he would replace it with inferior stuff. Rav Chanina, he made a sisa, right? What he did was he made some kind of a ball, tied them up, right, to be able to keep it so that they would not break during the washing process. And Ravina chayet lehu mechat. And Ravina actually sewed up a little pouch into his garment and tucked the tzitzis in there in order to protect it. Okay, so we will stop here. We'll pick up with how many threads go into your tzitzis tomorrow.
According to the Torah Rabbanan.
Yeah.